my mic on? Everyone can hear me now? No, not yet. And my slide are not there yet either. Everyone can hear me now. Perfect. Thank you very much. And thank you, Chris. Thanks to the organization of the BSides as well. So first question, how many of you is your first time at BSides? So I guess everyone else has a chance over the last couple of years to see at least one of my presentation, I guess, right? So this year is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to talk about a real story about one of the sessions that I have delivered to an international conference in Amsterdam, where I have totally failed. Okay. As usual, I have pigs to throw to the room. For every good question. And I have also T-shirt from Splunk, company that we acquired a couple of months ago. So if you guys are willing to participate within my session, feel free to comments, ask questions, raise your hands, or whatever, okay? So here you go. There you go. A little bit about myself, for those of you who don't know me. My name is Alexandre Argeris. As you can see with my French accent, I'm from Quebec, and I usually speak French. So I've been a proud speaker at BSides for the last couple of years, I would say almost for a decade now. I've been talking about multiple different subjects that are pretty cool in my mind, maybe not in yours, but whatever. I've been in touch with computer at a very young age. I was fortunate to be able to get a hands on a very old IBM, I guess, at that time. I was able to start digging into the internet as well with Gopher. How many of you remember Gopher? Oof, yeah. And I started to code, and here I will say like an amateur, probably in 1995 or ish, building my own web page or whatever, like many of you as well at that time. I have over 25 years of IT security experience, working for multiple different organizations, but mostly with Bell Canada, and Cisco for the last 10 years, as well as a cybersecurity expert. I have 3 kids, a wonderful wife, and if you're looking for me during winter, I usually on a ski hill. If you're looking for me during summer, then I'm on my road bike or on my mountain bike as well. So a couple of warning here. I usually do those warning. The first one, make sure to be aware that that presentation typically contains information that may actually cause you to think. Right? That's one of my goals all the time. All that presentation, it's all about me, right? And the story as well that I've been through. And it's not the opinion of my employer, which is Cisco, it's my own. And please ask question. You guys are familiar with that. Ask question, otherwise it's gonna be boring, just listening at me. And I'm gonna go over that as well. Please comment. So BSides is typically an event that is there to share experience and all that. So if you guys think that you're an expert in the area that I'm going to present, raise your hand and say to everyone that I'm wrong. If you have any other comment, question as well, raise your hand. And if you want to share your experience with others, that's the best thing to do. So let's dive into the subject here. So any of you have tried to build an API in a couple of minutes? Let's say the time it takes to microwave a popcorn. No? Okay, fair enough. That's what I have tried. Okay, and on top of that, for those of you who know me, I'm not a coder like per se. I'm not an expert either, right? I'm a cybersecurity expert that are dealing with multiple different products. That's what I'm doing for life. But I have tried to show at an international conference, which is called Cisco Live, in Amsterdam the first time, how to build an API in 15 minutes. Okay? So unfortunately, So unfortunately, it didn't go well. I'm going to tell you the story, of course, but before going to the story itself, I think I want to make sure that everyone get advantage of my story, which is going to be pretty short, don't worry about that. And hopefully we will be able to learn from that mistake as well, everyone. Make sense? So just to make sure that we set the stage here, I'm going to spend a couple of minutes on API. Okay? How many of you are familiar with API or think that they are? Well, okay, that's nice. For those of you who are not really familiar with API, I'm going to try to focus on REST API, okay, which is the type of API that is mostly used these days. And REST API is based on the HTTP protocol, almost, right? It's look very similar. It's leveraged the verbs or action as well that we're familiar with HTTP, whether it's for the request or the error code as well for the return. There's multiple different verbs that are used. The first one is post, which gives you the ability to create something. Get, typically the one that is most used as well. So when you guys use your browser or any apps within your phone and whatever other stuff as well, you're mostly going to do a get to get information from a service. But there's other as well, like put, delete, and patch as well. So the delete one is, of course, if you want to delete a record or something else on a distant resource. If we dig into the way API requests work, right? And that's pretty important to understand for the rest of the presentation as well. So the first part everyone is familiar with is the destination or the server that we're targeting, right? Or the service that we're targeting to. And then there's the something called a resource as well, or resource. Sorry, my French is coming back here. So typically it's where the resource is located within that service. And then there's the query parameter at the end, okay? For those of you who are not familiar with the query parameter, is everything after the question mark, typically. So you can see this in the line of your browser as well. It's something that could be dynamic. It could be changed as well based on the request that you're initiating to the destination service. Make sense? Any questions so far? I have T-shirt. REST, yeah, go ahead. Can I have a T-shirt? That's a good one. Of course, you can get one. Fait plaisir. REST API response. Curtis?
Monty Python. What's your favorite color?
Wrong. No, you can get the snort big. REST API response. So there's multiple different response within the HTTP protocol itself that is built into it. The one that is most known, it's 404, right? How many of you have received or see 404 error within their browser? A lot of you guys. But when you're dealing with API, you want to get a successful response, which is 200 or 202, which is not listed over there. That typically say, yeah, the request was good, or the request has been successful, and I have been able to create something in the backend, let's say, with 202. But there's many more as well. As a coder, or let's say someone that is building a script, the one that you want to look for as well is the 500, which means that there's something wrong within your code that has been trying to be executed in the backend itself. Okay? REST API typically use JSON, and typically people expect to receive a JSON response as well. There's other type of response, of course, but the one that is mostly used is JSON. So in this case over here, I'm just making of an API and ask for alt title from author called Alexandre, let's say. And the response, of course, it's 200 with the JSON path within it. That's just an example here, right? So let's try to design and create an API then, okay? So First of all, when you create an API, it's quite important to clearly define the purpose and the goal of the API. Okay, so that's the first thing. And then you want to determine the functionality of the API itself. Of course, you want to identify the use case and the scenario where those API will be used. And you need to identify the needs and the requirement of the developer as well, so they can be aware of how to leverage that API. Define the scope of the API. That's quite important as well, so it can identify to the developer, again, all these different boundary and limits as well of the API itself. Naming convention, quite important as well. So, for example, if you want to, if you're hosting a database of user, let's say, right? And you want to get access to data from those users, you better use user with an S instead of user without S, because it's definitely going to host multiple different users. And maybe you want to use something like a user ID instead of their name, because it could have multiple person that has the same name as well. And then under that path, then you should have something like their name, last name, dates, or whatever other stuff as well that may be important in that path or that database. No question. You guys are so, I will not say boring, but I will say quiet. So documentation is quite important as well. Documentation, an example. It's very relevant for those ones that will leverage your API or use your API. So there's multiple different ways to do documentation. There's commercial product, there's open source product as well. The one that is mostly used is Swagger. It's an open source tool that literally gives the ability to developers to almost test the API through a simple HTML interface or portal as well, right? So let's dive into what I like, creating your own API. So I have choose to leverage something called Flask. It's a module within Python, right, to create my API, remember, in 15 minutes, okay? So how many of you are familiar with Flask? Wow, nice. So quite easy module, very light, that typically give you the ability to create your web server, but also a very nice service when you want to host an API, okay? It's just a matter of installing the module itself within your environment of Python. And then you identify the path of your API with very simple things like an app.route decorator, okay? In that case, remember, that was an example while I was presenting this at Cisco Live. So I said the first one will be to be able to test it, okay, through a regular browser. So the output of the request, which is the path, the primary path of the service was hello Cisco Live, okay? And then the API itself was under /API/session. And remember, this was just a very simple API, so the response was pre-canned, right? And the response was just a very simple JSON with the message 200. So here's the 10 lines API script, right? Quite easy to build, very easy to read as well. Does this thing is useful? No, not at all, okay? But just an example here. So let's try to push, deploy, and run this API now, okay? I'm getting to the story, guys, don't worry. So there's multiple different ways to push an API. In this example, I have choose to use serverless from different cloud provider to be able to push that API easily. And I have choose AWS. Chris, you're going to be happy with that. Thank you. So I have choose to use AWS Lambda function for that. It was quite easy for me to leverage a module within Python, which is called Zappa or Zape or whatever in English, which is a very light module as well that allow you to deploy serverless or your code within a serverless environment. And then it's just a matter of a couple of commands, and then your script is deployed literally within the AWS Lambda function services. So if you look at that, it's been like just a couple of minutes, literally, to deploy my API, and that was the beginning of the story down here, okay? So the deployment, and then you get the URL of your API within the serverless service. You can test it as well. So in this case, I have chosen to test it prior to that on my own laptop. There's multiple different ways to do that. For those of you who are familiar with Python, it's just a matter of running it locally on one of your environment, or there's different other tools as well that you can leverage. If you want to go a little bit deeper than this, you can change the IP, you can change the port as well, but that's not the part of the story here. I'm getting there. And then I want to test my API as well, right? So remember the first path was just to test it to a browser. Say, OK, work. And then if I look at the logs, everything seems to be OK as well, OK? I can test it to Postman as well. How many of you guys are familiar with Postman? Yeah, nice. So the HTTP method or action or verb that I was talking about, the URL itself, and then the response, status response code, and the output as well, or the JSON response from the service. And then for fun, here's the thing, things are getting crunchy here, okay? So for fun, after the presentation, or at the end of the presentation, I have chosen to create a script that was able to do something a little bit different here, okay? Instead of just pushing a response with a static information into it, I have chosen to create an API which is not, here a second here. So if you have found something, don't tell me right now, okay? I'm getting there. I have chosen to create an API just to show to people how to manipulate input, okay, with an API request. So I said, OK, what I can do that is very easy for all kind of customer across all kind of area of IT to understand, a ping, right? Everyone knows what a ping is. So I said, OK, let's create an API that if I give the API an IP, the service itself will try to ping that host and response with something like, yeah, it worked, no, it didn't work, and the result, or whatever, right? So within that script, that was a little bit different than the other one. There's the app route that is set to API ping, and then I'm looking for the input, right, which is the IP. And then I'm taking that variable and create that ping command within the server that hosts the API itself. And then I create the response, right? What was the response? Then I create the JSON response and send it back to the requester itself. So if you test that to Postman, it's looked like that, right? As you can see, the URL has changed a little bit. Now there's a question mark within the API, followed by the IP. And the response is, yeah, IP whatever. True means that the IP was reachable. If you look at the logs within the script that was executing that function, it worked as well. And then, right? For those of you who are not familiar with Cisco Live, it's kind of a very, very big conference where there's thousands and thousands and thousands of people that are showing up. There's people that has a specialty in networking, but also in all other area, including coding as well. Okay? For a speaker like me that speak at Cisco Live, usually what we're after, it's notes, right? We want to be great because every speaker get a survey by 8 individual people that came to your session, and they grade you from 1 to 5. Okay, so everyone is after the 5 because you want to be able to be identified as a distinguished speaker. Unfortunately, right after my session, like not even a second, I would say, someone has posted a comment on my survey that said that I have something wrong with my code, right? And that guy marked me as, give me a note of 1. Like, oof. Right? I said, what? Right? What the heck I have within my code? So it told me that I have a remote execution vulnerability within my code. So I said, what? Again? Like, so I spent literally the entire night looking at those 25 lines of code, right? Trying to figure out what I did wrong. Were you able to find it? Okay. So let's talk a little bit about that. So there is only 25 lines of code within my code, right? Remember, guys, I'm not an expert in coding, right? I do this for fun. I'm a script kiddies, if you want to say, right? I copy, and I think I said that many times over here. I copy and paste things that I found on Google most of the time, right? So that's how I code typically. This is only 25 lines of code. Are you guys have been able to find the problem here? Right? So of course, it's require a hacker mindset here, right? It's always that issue here. So I do have a couple of people that has raised their hand over there.
One back here, Alex. Tap on the light. You raise your hand. Is there?
Yeah.
Input standardization.
So if you look at the first, and I'm going to repeat that later on, right? So if you look at the first function over here, I was literally just looking at something called IP, which is the option or the parameter input within the API request. And I was taking that IP variable and injecting that variable directly into the ping command within the host that was running the API itself, okay? So if we look at the API request itself, as you can see, there's a question mark, which is state for the input, and say IP equal 8.8.8, whatever, right? But if we look at that, and if we're are familiar with something called command daisy chaining, mostly on Linux or Mac or Unix as well, there is a way to add extra command. So I said, okay. Here's my issue, right? Because I remember that guy didn't tell me what was the vulnerability within my code, right? And I had the day after that to present that session again. Yeah. So that's why I have spent the entire night at looking at it, right? And trying to figure out the issue. So I said, okay, let's try this. If I go into a CLI or a shell of Linux and try, let's say, ping -2.8.8.8.8, and then semicolon whatever other command, like ifconfig or whatever other stuff as well, does it work? Yeah, it works. Okay? So here's the issue. So if you want to look at one way how to exploit this, it's to craft your own API request with all these extra commands after the ping or after the IP, right? So if you look at over here, you're going to see that I was able to say, you know what? Default API, which is 8.8.8. That was the original parameter that the script was looking for. But I was not really looking for anything else, but the script was executing everything else, right? So in this case, I said, okay, can you grab something that is called malicious or -code.sh on that remote server, and can you execute that code after that? And it worked. Right? It worked. So here's the example of the attacker side. if you look at the hacker side, it's just like a flat file. So this is just an example here, right? It's not really relevant to really compromising a server over here, right? That it's just an example. It's just a plain text, and at the end of the script, it's leverage a command wall, which send a message to all terminal on the that is all open. Let's say SSH and CLI and all that is open on the remote server. And I say, can you just send that text message to all those terminals? So if you look on the compromised side server, which is the server that hosts that API, what you end up having is this. You have been hacked, right? So I just proved through my API that was vulnerable, that I was able to compromise that server, okay? Here's another example that is very more useful. So in this case, for those of you who are familiar with, is there anyone that is familiar with Netcat, let's say, right? A couple of folks here. Here we go. So for those of you who are familiar with Netcat, it gives you the ability to run, execute multiple different things on, and exploit something that is really like, it's to be able to run a reverse shell on something else. So in this case, I've leveraged that vulnerability again from my API to execute that netcat command and send all that to the attacker side and say, okay, now you now have full access of the compromised server without having to log in, right? Of course, right? Just by executing or sending that API request to the compromise. So of course, someone mentioned it in the back, right? It's all about REST API validation. That was the issue, right? So when you're creating a code, you better look at all the input that you're requesting from either another machine or from a human as well, right? Unfortunately, I'm a junior coder, like many of you guys as well, probably. If you're not doing for work or for life coding, and you're more like a sysadmin or like you're security analyst or whatever, and you're doing DevOps or SecDevOps on your part-time, then you may be a junior coder like myself as well. And unfortunately, even if I'm working in cybersecurity, I have totally forget about security best practice. That's why I said I failed, right? So the vulnerability could have been easily controlled by adding extra layer of checking and multiple other stuff as well. So in this case, the easiest part was to add something called IP address function that literally look at the input parameter and validate that it's only an IP and nothing else, okay? So here's how it's work. I have changed a little bit my script over here for my second session the day after. and say, okay, now when you get that IP from the API request, make sure to pass this to the other function called ipaddress.ip_address to validate that this is an IP and nothing else. And if it's not an IP, then just responds with something like not a valid IP to the requester. So there's many other ways that I have been able to find those type of vulnerability within code. So there's commercial and open source tools that are available, of course. If you're leveraging an open source one, or a public tool as well, because there's even public available tool on the internet as well, please be careful not to share any confidential information, right? Or intellectual property as well. Any questions so far? No? Okay. Yeah.
How's the rating the next day?
It's 4.6, I think, or something like that. Yeah. So in, yep.
I'm curious if you put your code through AI, would have picked it up and fixed it for you?
Yeah, they can't hear online. Repeat the question.
I'm curious if you would have put your code through an AI, would have picked it
Look
up
at
and
look at the slide.
getting there.
Look at the slide. Here's a good question. Be careful. Whoop. In my case, since it was just a personal code, very simple code as well, I have choose to leverage my internal AI system at Cisco and just ask the AI itself, is there something wrong with my code, right? And here the answer, right? Right away, the AI said, you have a command injection vulnerability, and the last one is lack of input validation. So I have literally spent a couple of hours missing good food in Amsterdam and all that, having fun with colleagues and customer for a 5-minute search on AI. So there is a couple of lessons learned, right? I'm at the end of the session, guys, and I still have 2 pigs and a T-shirt. So there is a lesson learned, of course. Please use tool. We are all human, but please use tool to double check your script, even if it's a very, very small script or code or whatever, right? If tools are not available, or if you're in the wrong team, let's say, right? Because sometimes the DevOps team do have access to those tools, but you as a security admin or whatever, a system admin, you don't know that those tools exist, ask your colleagues, right? That's all the purpose of my session as well. And notes to myself, right? Do not show up at an international conference with a script full of vulnerability anymore, right? Any question, guys? Yep.
What if you're working on code that's really highly confidential and you don't want to pump it into an AI tool?
Yeah, so there's
Can you repeat the question?
So the question was, and I did touch a little bit on that. The question is, what about if you have a code that is very highly sensitive in terms of information, maybe about customer or intellectual properties as well? Typically, what you want to do is to deal with commercial product, right, that guarantee the confidentiality of all these information. Okay. Any other question? Yeah, go ahead here.
I think instead of using input sanitization, you could instead exclude the shell equals true parameter. Yeah, sure. I think instead of using the shell equals true parameter in the command and using input sanitization, like there's always potential for that to be bypassed if it's not a fully solid solution. But with the subprocess.popen method, you can pass a list instead of a concatenated string, and that has a lot less potential for command injection. Yeah, probably. I guess you're probably a better expert than me on this, right? Everything is probably true what you're saying for sure, right? Like in coding, there's always multiple different ways to achieve what you're looking for. There is better way to do things sometimes, or optimized function as well that can be leveraged instead of other, for sure. Chris, you had a question.
Yeah.
Really here you go.
Did you get 5 out of 5 on the second set?
No, the question was already asked. I think overall I get 4.6 or 4.6 something, and I didn't get the distinguished speaker mark, unfortunately. Yeah.
But
yeah.
You brought maple syrup, I think.
So I brought maple syrup. Yeah, that's a good point.
So my question was, did you ever talk to the person?
So the question is, did I ever talk to the person who made that comment or that finding? No, because those surveys are anonymous. So I was not able to talk to that person. And frankly, like at that time, I didn't know what I was going to tell him, right? Yep.
So your next presentation, you're sure going to say, blame it on the API, I'll know who you are.
Yep. Oh, question over there.
Salut, Alexandre. I'm curious, in the vein of AI, did you ask AI to write you this code to see if it would write it correctly or if it would have the vulnerability as well?
So that's a good question. I didn't use API to build that initial script. If that was a question, I didn't use it.
So if you were to just ask it to I was wondering if you tested it, because I'm wondering if it would actually write something with the vulnerability,
Yeah.
or if it would write
No,
something
that's a good question. In my mind, the API will probably don't give you the error, right? Because I was poorly coding the example here, right? And the API is typically not doing this type of error, I'm pretty sure.
But if you were to ask ChatGPT to write this for you, instead of you looking it up, I'm wondering, because like a lot of times people do that, they say, give me this, and they
Yep.
run it. Would it write it securely or not?
Yeah, that could be the next subject of my topic next week, next year. Thank you. Guys, it was fun again to be in front of you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to reach me on LinkedIn. I would be happy to share any content with you again.